There we are. He's perfectly safe now. This is not your daughter. Do you understand? Her name is Eleanor, and she is mine. Now, kneel, please. Remove your helmet. Now, take the pistol. Place it against your head. Fire.
When thinking of BioShock 2, I often lump it with the black sheeps of gaming, the sequels that had to follow up on a video game that was immediately regarded as one of the greatest of all time. They are the maligned entry that is secretly the best of the series. The Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty, the Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker, the Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords, the Far Cry 2, the Grand Theft Auto 4, the Max Payne 3 games of video game canon. Games that often received reevaluation after the hype cycle had undergone its course and reached the point in time in which a game originally rejected and ridiculed by video game consumerists and forum posters becomes heralded as good, actually. One game I don't think has fully received its due recompense is BioShock 2. I first played through BioShock 2 in December of 2012, and it was then and there that I knew that BioShock 2 was good, actually. Engaging with the combat in BioShock 2 is an overall improvement on the original, due to now being able to simultaneously wield and fire a weapon and plasmid without swapping between the two offensive options. In BioShock, you would have to choose between equipping a plasmid or equipping a weapon as your on-hand utility. In BioShock 2, you already have both active, and simply have to choose which you want currently equipped in each hand. Left is dedicated to plasmids, and right to guns. This makes combat much more active and engaging, as your combinations of attacks work more efficiently when both plasmid and weapon can be triggered with the touch of a button. Electrifying an enemy and then bashing with the drill, lighting an enemy on fire and then letting loose a heat-seeking rocket, spearing an enemy before pulling it and shooting it back in with telekinesis, and insect swarming with any weapon's special ammo, as the swarm keeps them in place stunned. Overall, the minute-to-minute gameplay of BioShock 2 is better than the original, and the weapons are adapted to fit into your status as a Big Daddy, which I appreciated. BioShock 2's largest contribution in terms of gameplay sequences is a two-part scenario, which also serves as the two largest climactic encounters at the end. The first scenario is a wave defense, when guarding a little sister who is harvesting Adam from predetermined corpses littered throughout the map of each level. These defensive scenarios allow you to utilize alternative trap ammo, as well as trap plasmids at choke points and around the general area of a corpse before putting the little sister down to begin the harvesting. The second is a battle against the Big Sisters, the face of the game and one of the best contributions to the overall BioShock entity. They are as tough as a Big Daddy, but much more agile and capable of dealing damage. Their speed and smaller physique makes them harder to hit than the hulking Big Daddies, and they are much more aggressive with their plasmid usage, causing a majority of my in-game deaths. During my most recent playthrough, I had built up such an arsenal that I could easily just sit back in a corner and allow the plasmid and ammo traps kill every single splicer that attempted to interrupt the harvest. These segments are completely optional, but due to their surplus Adam rewards, make it something that should be engaged with. Adam is the currency for purchasing new plasmids, upgrading plasmids, and getting more health, Eve, and active plasmid slots, making them the most useful resource in the game. These defense segments also allow you more opportunities to research the different enemy types after you've unlocked the camera. Research bonuses are how you get some of the best gene tonics, such as the upgraded Armored Shell, the Drill Vampire, and the Fountain of Youth tonics. Defending Little Sisters from Splicers are the lead-ins to confrontations against Big Sisters, as Big Sisters only appear once every Little Sister has been dealt with in a level. This allows you to pick which vent by which to resolve the Little Sister decision, and prepare the surrounding area accordingly for the subsequent battle, which were always thrilling. Mixing and matching defense and offensive options makes the playthrough feel much more varied as you bounce from fighting splicers in a new area to looting, fighting a big daddy, placing a little sister for a wave defense, and repeating until the ultimate confrontation with a big sister. More critically than in gameplay, BioShock 2 succeeds in telling a compelling story with its characters. Whereas in BioShock the main story was highly regarded for its big twist, there wasn't much more to it than that twist. The characters in BioShock were the highlight, each a twisted and morose individual whose personality made each level memorable up to the moment you killed them and moved on in the dark ride of Rapture. It all culminated in an ending sequence that everyone mostly ignores when talking about its successes, because after the twist it didn't have anything worthwhile left. BioShock 2 has an idea and executes it on it fully for a much more satisfactory whole. In BioShock 2, you are an example for your adopted daughter Eleanor to learn from. By watching how you decide to deal with not only the little sisters, but with specific characters who antagonize you throughout each of their levels, she will ultimately make a decision that determines the type of ending you receive. This reflection of action is indicative of how our own children learn from us, whether we are aware or intend for it or not. Children are always watching and will pick up on mannerisms you might not even recognize until they perform it. Tantrum-throwing objects is a reflection of our own frustration, and imitation as play reinforces everyday actions as routine. Eleanor learns from the player, and through a more complex flowchart of points compared to the original game, will make the final decision of whether Sophia Lamb, Eleanor's mother and your main antagonist throughout the game, lives or dies. The original BioShock's moral choice dilemma was a black and white decision between saving or killing little sisters. Killing little sisters would net you more Adam in the short term, but saving them ended with an overall larger number of Adam to spend on gameplay abilities, making salvation the desired route to take. Sparing or killing a child is not a real moral conundrum. It's a simplistic decision given weight only by the empty words of marketing. BioShock 2 muddles the mechanical reward to its benefit. The maximum overall Adam you can gain is a mixture of saving every little sister until a certain point, where you gain a tonic that gives you more Adam for harvesting, at which point you use them to gain Adam from corpses before killing them yourself. The decision to kill or spare a child is still cartoonishly simple for a moral decision, but it is at the very least made more complex by the mathematical equations behind them. Retaining the save or kill decision reads much more like certain features from Fallout 3 carrying over into Fallout New Vegas. That is, as a consequence of restricted development time and inheriting another studio's data within which to chisel your own familiar but new and superior piece of art. More thoughtful choices in the game come in the form of the named characters whose fate is determined by the player. The first character you meet is Grace Holloway, a woman who was entrusted by Sophia Lamb to watch over her daughter, Eleanor, while Lamb was imprisoned by Andrew Ryan. Holloway failed, and Eleanor was inducted into the Little Sister program and bonded with your player character, Delta. Holloway hates you for this. Next is Stanley Poole, an agent for Ryan who was responsible for the flooding of Lamb's retreat in Dionysus Park, and Eleanor's introduction into the Little Sister program after she caught his work as a double agent. Lastly is the tragic character of Gilbert Alexander, a scientist who underwent a radical experiment on behalf of Lamb that left him transformed into a new organism, and left behind audio logs prior to his descent into madness that would teach a would-be savior how to deliver him from his current state. The fates of these three characters, combined with the player's decisions for the little sisters they encounter, will lead to one of 6 endings. Thanks to this flexibility, it is entirely possible to get a good ending with Lamb dead, or a bad ending where Lamb lives, or a neutral ending where you killed each character and had a mixture of saving and harvesting little sisters. My preferred choice of ending is saving all the little sisters and only sparing Holloway, as Poole deserved death for his crimes and Alexander was a mercy killing at his own request. Holloway is a traditional misguided henchman duped into villainy. Poole is a classical self-serving villain, and Alexander is a tragic figure, whose death is more of an assisted suicide than outright murder based on vengeance or justice. Lamb's fate is not up to you directly, similarly to how Ryan's death in the original was beyond your control. BioShock 2 is different in that her continued life or fateful end is dependent on the actions you made up to that point. It is left up to your adopted daughter Eleanor to decide. She learns from you as a child learns from their parents. It's a much more compelling undercurrent to the game than the original's Would You Kindly, being a conceit of a player character lacking agency in most games. Even with the flowcharts explaining the criteria for each ending, the unseen complexity underneath the various avenues available to the player upon their first playthrough means that the ending they receive will be a much more honest reflection of themselves played out by the actions of Eleanor. Andrew Ryan has become part of video game canon as one of the most compelling antagonists encountered in games. He is the industrialist founder of Rapture, the setting which so bewitched everyone in the first BioShock. The largest hole left by BioShock that its sequel would have to somehow fill would be that of its main antagonist. How could you top Andrew Ryan? BioShock 2 addresses this issue in two ways. The first is that it still includes many audio logs from Andrew Ryan, so that you can once again be regaled by his charisma and ego-stroking monologues. BioShock 2 also does some retroactive addition with the introduction of Sophia Lamb, a psychiatrist who seeks to create a utopia using her ideology of collectivism in direct opposition to Ryan. She is now known as one of the great figures of Rapture, going so far as to have even debated Ryan publicly over the future of the city and being included in a photo of Rapture's Best and Brightest 1952. Just as Eleanor's ending decision is a reflection of the player, Sophia Lamb is a mirrored reflection of Andrew Ryan. Both spouted ideological babble in order to bring themselves into power, but neither were willing to separate that power from themselves. Ryan founded Rapture so that people could be free from regulation by government or religion, so that anyone could do what they wanted. This propaganda didn't include the asterisk that stated that this was all fine, so long as Ryan stayed on top. The original BioShock is the story of how Ryan's ideology of freedom fell once his position as top dog was threatened. Sophia Lamb is very much an altered reflection of that same grasping at power. Her collectivism is riddled with common good sentiments, but all with her at the top, with no equal or superior authority. Lamb is happy to sacrifice the individuals in her quest for the greater good, exemplified through Holloway, Poole, and Gill. Holloway was manipulated into serving Lamb out of guilt rather than adoration after the abduction of Eleanor. Poole's allegiance was known to Lamb prior to the drowning of Dionysus Park, making her implicitly guilty in his actions, and Gill was coerced into serving as a test tube. Lamb strips everyone of their humanity and turns them into pawns to be manipulated and moved around according to her will. She may be the complete opposite in terms of beliefs, but she is as hypocritical as Ryan, ruthlessly more so, as she rules not by force, but by love. Throughout the game, you will come across adoring murals painted in her honor. She refers to her followers as the family, and pressures people to carry out her will as examples of their devotion. Ryan is a tyrant, a familiar and often used person to fight against in all forms of fiction. Lamb is much more sinister, having a morally uprighteous front belying a rot of egomania. The utilization of coercing through adoration most similarly correlates in my own life to the use of religion and God's will to push an individual's agenda onto others. Some of the latest media to tap into this insidious form of religion would be Mike Flanagan's Midnight Mass in the character of Bev Keane, played by Samantha Sloyan, and on a more systemic level in Under the Banner of Heaven miniseries based on the book by John Krakauer covering the 1984 murder of Brenda and Erica Lafferty. Navigating a murder case involving deeply Mormon families included multiple conversations about faith and Heavenly Father as coverage for decisions and inaction that very much harkened back to my own years in service to the church and my family attended. Lamb's many audio logs recording conversations with followers and frequent propagandizing on speakers as you walk through Rapture gave me similar feelings of repulsion. She's the type of person to stab you while smiling and explaining why this outcome was the best thing that could happen to you, and fighting it will only hurt those you love. Lamb's indifference to all of those around her extended to her own daughter Eleanor, who wasn't as much a person as another tool by which to achieve utopia. Lamb never loved Eleanor. She loved the promise Eleanor held as the ultimate mechanism towards whatever Lamb's version of utopia was, most likely something like human instrumentality with herself as God. Eleanor, lacking a mother, was nonetheless a person with feelings and opinions. She rebelled against her mother constantly. The more Lamb tried to control Eleanor's growth, the more Eleanor chose the opposite. When Ryan imprisoned Lamb, Eleanor was left with Holloway, who cared for her with more love than Lamb did. That love, however, was more a substitute for Lamb than genuine care for the girl. Holloway loved to serve Lamb, and watching over Eleanor was a duty to be performed in that devotion. The loss of Eleanor was less the horror of losing a child and more the horror of having failed Lamb. With you, Subject Delta, she had more of a parent than before. It may have been a parasitic relationship created to harvest Adam above all else, yet despite this, the mute Delta was a better parent than anyone Eleanor had before. Compared to the motherhood of Lamb, a life bonded to the protector Delta gathering Adam was more freeing and fulfilling than as a subject to the Utopia project. Parenthood is a recurring subject throughout BioShock 2. Andrew Ryan's audio logs begin with his pondering of fathering a child, not knowing his son would one day kill him. Rapture is similarly Ryan's child, neglected out of his self-interest until it is the rusting, leaking, ready-to-collapse state it is during the events of the game. Holloway talks about how Lamb offering up Eleanor fulfilled her desire for motherhood, that was denied by both her infertility and the forced disappearance of her lover. A series of audio logs tells the story of a father named Mark Meltzer, whose daughter was kidnapped by a big sister, and his following descent into Rapture in an attempt to recover her that ended with him as a big daddy that you can fight and slay. Lamb and Eleanor's relationship makes up the core of the game's drama, with you serving as the imprint Eleanor acts upon. Our forward momentum is a reaction to Eleanor's love for us in the form of a father-daughter relationship. However, there is a more utilitarian reason for your desire to reunite with Eleanor, and it is due to the little sister Big Daddy bond you share. Brigadier Tenenbaum briefly returns in the beginning stages to inform you that death awaits if you do not once again get into contact with Eleanor. This muddies the bond between you into less of fatherly love and into a resolution to live. The dual motivation continues for a majority of the game, as each roadblock puts the player more at risk of death from separation, with flashing red seizures reminding you of this, despite it being a fraudulent threat as the player character will never actually die. And it blossoms into a concern and care for the one who calls you father and leaves gifts behind for you, pushing you ever towards a reunion. Eleanor reports that Lamb is continuing the Utopia project despite the disruption caused by her little sister programming, and Alexander serves as a grim warning for what fate might befall her if Lamb gets her way. After your climactic fight with two big sisters, you are stopped one last time by Lamb smothering her own child in an effort to sever the bond and kill you. She is partially successful. The link is broken, but you still live, though bound. Eleanor continues her rebellion by turning herself into a big sister after a unique section in which you control a little sister and gather the required materials for this transformation. While playing the little sister, you view Rapture through their eyes. Everything is pristine and heavenly. You'll occasionally get flashes of reality, reinforcing the vast gap between what a little sister sees and what everyone else does. Corpses are literal angels. The walls are furnished with expensive decorations, curtains adorn every wall, and splashers look like they might have when attending the 1958 New Year's Eve party. It is a helpful change in point of view that gives you some insight into the unique situation of the Little Sisters, and the reasoning behind their dialogue about angels and seeming indifference to the state of the world around them. The finale has you fighting alongside Eleanor as she becomes a summon via the final plasmid slot. The first time I played the game in 2012, I very rarely brought her into the action out of a naive fatherly concern for her safety. This recent time, I summoned her as often as I could, as I recognized the mechanical and narrative fulfillment of her rebellion against Lamb reaching a climax as she now had the means with which to fight back physically, whereas before it was all posturing and subterfuge. BioShock 2 is a game I keep thinking about every now and then, years and years after that first playthrough, both for the mark it left on me and how underappreciated it still seems to be. Unlike Wind Waker or Sons of Liberty, which were lampooned but eventually underwent a reevaluation in the culture writ large to become game canon, BioShock 2 remains in the shadow of both its predecessor and successor, and even its own DLC add-on expansion Minerva's Den, which had its own success completely separate from BioShock 2. Developer 2K Marin would eventually be handed what would become the Bureau, XCOM Declassified, itself a failed internal project within Irrational Games, first handed off to 2K Australia before becoming a 2K Marin project, and whose commercial failure would lead to 2K Marin's closure in October 2013, 2 months after the game's release. Something entirely forgotten between my initial playthrough in 2012 and 2013 and finishing my recent replay was that my wife and I had decided to name our baby daughter Eleanor in December of 2020. I had already known the connection to The Last of Us' Ellie when my wife presented the two name options she liked most, but it wasn't until I booted up BioShock 2 again in order to complete a replay and begin working on this essay that I was met with the audio log of Sophia Lamb discussing her daughter, Eleanor, and I was hit with the realization that this game, forgotten by a majority of the gaming public, was now made much more personal to my own life. The lessons taught by the game of children learning from those they love bears true and reminds me that my own daughter is watching and learning whether I'm aware of it at the moment or not.
If utopia is not a place, but a people, then we must choose carefully, for the world is about to change. And in our story, rapture was just the beginning.